Okay, so let's get started. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to talk through delivering games and activities in a COVID-19 environment. And actually, I'm really looking for a lot of, input from you all today. There's 66 of you on here, and you're the ones that are at the polls, and I want to hear more about what you're doing, what does work, what doesn't work, as we've also put together some of our ideas, and a couple of the team members within my team are teaching as well. So we've got great experience in our team, but I want to hear more examples as we go through, because you can never have too many ideas. So just a small disclaimer for you to take on board as well. So Swim England do not own or operate any pools or swim schools. Any changes you make should be in conjunction with the needs of your business and take into account the current climate. Any information contained in this webinar is for guidance only, and anyone wishing to make changes to their existing layouts should consult their manager, pool operator. In the event of changes to your sessions, we recommend reviewing your risk assessments. So for today, I want to take you through just a very brief guidance update. We know that everybody, or the majority of people, have probably come across our guidance by now, but just again, a light touch update on that. We're going to go into some key considerations. We're going to go into how to deliver and make an effective fun game. Games, activities and practices for stage 1 to 7. Again, this is where I'm going to look for some input from you all. Over to the experts. So actually we've got a good number today. We're going to try and pop you into some breakout rooms. We don't normally do this on a webinar because of the large numbers, but we really wanted to get more engagement on this one today. So we're going to give that a go. We're also going to look at the links through to stages 8, 9 and 10. All the resources that we have that can support you moving forward. And then of course we will open up the floor to a Q&A as well. Okay, so very briefly, let's take you through our returning to the pool. So our most latest publication was the addition of school swimming. So just to bring your attention to what we have within our returning to the pool guidance. So all 6 sections that you can see listed there. Now, just to note, make sure that you are going online to access the most up-to-date version. If you've downloaded a version previously, you may be missing some of the updates. So, very quick recap there on our guidance. We're going to dive straight into why are fun activities and games effective. So why do we use the fun approach? And I'm sure you're all dialed in today because you have this way of teaching as well and you want to expand your own knowledge. So we believe that all children have the right to learn to swim. That's probably why we're all in this job, because we love that. We love how rewarding it is. Their experience should be positive and support a lifelong love of aquatics. We're looking for children to learn skills through fun and engaging activities outside of the pool environment that can then be transferred into swimming lessons. Activities can combine a number of skills and you can assess a number of participants whilst they're completing an activity, rather than having the old style traditional one at a time. You can really get the children engaged as we go through. I can just see the chat box flashing up. I'm just gonna. Okay, Alex has just joined us. So there's myself and Alex on today's webinar, as I mentioned at the start. So we're looking at promoting that lifelong enjoyment of aquatics. We all know that if we really enjoy something at whatever age, child, teenager or adult, we will continue to return to that same activity, sport, hobby. If we don't enjoy it, we're going to probably give it in. So we want this to be enjoyable for all. So let's have a little look at some of the methods we can use to deliver a fun and engaging activity. Oh, So we've got quite a few listed. Now, just in the chat box, how many of you use or comment on which methods you most commonly use in your lessons? Is it games? Do you alter your delivery style? Are you quite hot on different themes from week to week? I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong answer here. It would just be interesting to see what you naturally sway towards. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of songs because I can't sing, but that doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't absolutely love including them in their classes and in their lessons. So yeah, Alison, great point, really like that. It actually depends on their level. So you might take a few of those for one ability and then just switch it a little bit. You're not typically going to use songs for your higher stages. So yeah, definitely. Somebody's commented about themes around the time of the year. So Halloween's coming up. Definitely. What else have we got? Themes. Oh, I really like themes. Good imagination for themes to come in. Brilliant. This chat box is going crazy with some of you directly messaging me as well, so apologies. Fab. Okay, so we really like this quote. This isn't ours, but scientists have recently determined that it takes approximately 400 repetitions to create a new synapsis in the brain unless it is done with play, in which case it takes between 10 to 20 repetitions. That's an incredible difference in somebody picking up that new repetition, that new habit, or that new skill. We're such fans of this quote. So yeah, we thought we'd include that. So we're just going to touch on some key considerations, and these will be things that you are all probably already implementing, but just in case there's anything here that you may have not been aware of. So I commented on the guidance, so make sure you're accessing our most up-to-date guidance. We have risk assessment templates available as well, and I'm sure everything that you are all delivering is risk assessed, but that is regularly reviewed. And if you change the style of delivery or the pool environment, the pool setup, that you are also changing and updating that risk assessment. Inclusive practice and returning to swimming lessons, so really making sure that you're accessing this e-learning to change the way you're delivering returning if you've not yet returned to the pool. So we have got on the screen, click here to access your previous training. What we'll make sure is we drop the link in the chat box for you. Please, yes, Gwyneth has just asked for that. Absolutely. So we will drop the link in there before we finish today so that you can access all of that as well. So just a brief overview on that risk assessment. We're not here to teach you how to suck eggs today, but obviously just ensure that your risk assessments are up to date. We also do have a free template on the website as well, linked to the returning to the pool guidelines. Another question for you all in the chat box. I would like to know how you use your non-verbal communication and your verbal communication whilst you are teaching. I always like this one. Have a look. Yeah, so body demonstrations, verbal to explain and non-verbal to show. I like that, Sue. Facial expressions, hand signals, demonstration, thumbs up if they're on their back. Oh, you guys are quick. Pictures that are laminated. I like that, Gwyneth. Flashcards, positive body language, show and hand signals. I use signs and voice. If the swimmer is advanced, I would touch chin if they need to lift their head. Yeah, so almost that directional demonstration. So almost that if you need them to get that head back a little bit more, say on backstroke. Helen said about sign language, fantastic. really good. A lot of my teachers at my old site would actually use Makaton just across all their classes, which I was very fortunate to have such skilled swimming teachers. Yeah, Sue, I really like that in terms of verbal communication. Actually, the use of our tone, so volume, speed of voice, what are you doing alongside that verbal communication as well? So some really good suggestions there. And I believe Alex has just dropped a couple of links in there for you. So our webinar recording link in there and our returning to the pool through the Institute of Swimming, which is all online for you. So top tips, again, this is all the key considerations that you will all be using during your teaching. So make your communication fun, ensure the whole class can hear and see you. Keep it relevant and age appropriate. Can't remember who it was, but as soon as I showed that first slide and said, I'm not necessarily a fan of singing, somebody commented saying, it also depends on what age, because would it be appropriate for me to use a nursery rhyme for the higher stages? They probably look at me like I'm a bit of a donut, shall I say. So yeah, definitely keep it relevant and age appropriate. Use different types of communication to suit learners' needs as well. Ensure clear and concise communication. And remember, verbal communication works best when combined with visual demonstrations or diagrams. So again, just another quick recap on those organisational methods that you might look at and want to vary throughout your delivery of teaching. This also might change with COVID's considerations. So please bear that in mind as we go through the next couple of diagrams as well. Also bear in mind where you stand in relation to where the participants are placed is a very important factor when deciding which communication method to use. We do understand that each pool is different, so the diagram you can see on the screen here, we have given 3 examples of effective teaching positions, but you might actually only have access to one side of the pool to deliver from, so we are really aware of that. So a good organisational method are your waves, and you can actually see on this diagram that we've got 3 of our swimmers starting on one side and 3 of our swimmers starting on the other side, and that's going to help you with the organisational method of using waves, but in that COVID environment as well. We've got a cannon. I'm sure you have all seen these organisational methods, so it's just that recap. Random spacing, circuits, and just a quick summary on those points as well. Be flexible with your teaching position and adapt to the swimmers. We understand that you might not have as much flexibility as what you used to because of COVID restrictions. Prepare and communicate with swimmers and parents. Vary approach and keep it fun. Consider what the learners see. So sometimes you might be given a demonstration, but actually you're trying to do verbal and a demo as well, and the children might not be able to hear you. So it might be delivering that demonstration first and then following up with verbal, or vice versa. Keep your learners active, so don't have them still for too long where possible. Use a variety of different communication methods, which we have just touched on. Change organisational method to suit the practice you are working on as well. And involve your learners in your approach. So again, a real whistle-stop touch point of all of those things to lead us right up into our activities and games. This is the main chunk of today's webinar. So let's hand over to Alex, and I'm going to jump into the chat box a second.
Awesome, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, what we wanted to do is just kind of talk today a little bit about how we think we should construct a game in a COVID environment, but also get some feedback from you guys, because ultimately that's the most important thing, is your guys' feedback and how you guys would adapt as well. So again, we know you guys, there's some tutors on the call, there's some level 2 instructors, there's some aquatic leads, there's lots of experience on the call, so we don't want you to teach you to suck eggs, as it were. But here are some kind of 101, some basic things we think are important when you're considering developing this game or an activity in a COVID environment. So first of all, is it safe? So that might be appropriate, as Lauren said, to the ability or the age, but also we've got factors around COVID to consider if it's for safe now. So things such as social distancing, as contact, all the classes that you might have to consider. You might now be in a different depth or location of the pool because your organizer has changed that because of COVID restrictions. So think about those safety aspects that might need to be adapted, and Lauren's done some examples coming up in a moment. Is it progressive? Ultimately, we want things to be progressive and purposeful, so that the game either progresses a certain skill or links skills together, but also can the skill be progressive, the activity be progressive throughout the lesson as well. Age and ability appropriate. So we've got some game examples that you can adapt for a number of stages and ages, but some are definitely more geared towards certain ages. So just consider your audience and who you're delivering to, whether that be school swimming, whether that be preschool, whether that be stage 7. There's some big key differences between those three that I've just mentioned. Is the game fun? As Lauren said, the power of something being fun in terms of somebody being able to learn and adapt to that skill a lot quicker. And then can we link in elements of fundamental movement skills? So things like throwing, running, jumping, catching. Can we develop core aquatic skills? So we're thinking about our aquatic breathing, our rotation, orientation, streamlining, all these kind of skills. And then how does that then ultimately lead into the 4 main strokes? And if you do those fundamental movement skills and the core aquatic skills throughout your activities and games, then you'll absolutely get towards those 4 strokes throughout the 7 stages. Okay, Lauren, could we have the next slide, please? So this is something that most people, I imagine, are familiar, and just the SMART principle of setting a goal. So it is important when you set out a game, and it's something that I'm sure tutors have come across on on courses before, is often it can be a really fun, exciting, interacting game, and that's brilliant, but it needs to have a goal. So what is the purpose of that game or activity? What are you trying to achieve? It might be teamwork. It might be that it's you're building a certain skill up. It might be that you're working towards water safety, but it needs to be goal-based. I've only got 30 minutes of these learners each week. Maybe you've got a little bit more, but on most cases, it's only 30 minutes. So what can we do to make sure that we're really kind of purposeful with our actions? So this is one example you might have come across before, and it's considering your game and is it specific? So what are you specifically trying to target or work on? So for example, front crawl kick. So let's say we're doing some kind of race that involves front crawl kick and we're doing some kind of animal races. Is it measurable? So are you just getting the learners to go endlessly up and down the pool and then they're going to get fatigued and their ability is going to drop? Or are we going to say, well, it's 10 meters because they're in stage 4, so that's reflective of the outcomes, and we're going to do that 5 times because I can measure that and I can see how they're performing as we go. Is it attainable? So is it achievable? And that kind of links with relevant as well. So if you're doing that same practice for stage 1, so we just said we're doing 10 meters kicking kind of practice, something like that. Is that going to be relevant stage 1? No, absolutely not. They're going to be doing traveling and moving. But equally, stage 7, that's probably going to be far too easy. What are they going to benefit? So it's not very relevant to their stage. So think about, is it relevant to the outcomes and also that individual ability? And can that learner therefore achieve it? We want to challenge learners, but without making it unachievable or attainable so that they fail. So what can we do to make it progressively harder? And then finally, time-based. We just need to make sure, again, going back to that 30-minute slot as we referenced, it's not a lot of time. So what can we do to make sure that the game is on time? I'm definitely guilty of running over my games. I do lots of different ones, and I'm very guilty of that. So that's something I have to check myself with to make sure I plan my lessons well. Okay, so again, as Lauren set out at the start of this webinar, we're not trying to go through every single point of a game today because we know you guys are doing this week in, week out. But there are some key things I wanted to discuss. And one of those is differentiation. Sure, it's a mouthful to say, so I'm glad that came out first time. But this is where you might have a process of having a different approach for 2 different people or groups or an activity that suits that individual's ability to progress or develop. So for example, you could have a class doing 10 meters kicking, keep with that example that we used on the previous slide, but actually some learners might be able to do that with flotation equipment. Some might be able to do it without flotation equipment. So that's a very basic one. Some learners might be able to progress where they're doing push and glide or a form of rotation, where some learners might just need to kick. And that's okay. You can still do the same activity or game. We've got some examples of this coming up again. But where they're doing slightly different outcomes or they're working to slightly different standards that's suitable for their individual progression. So when you're developing your games or your lesson plans or however you structure your lessons, think about how you can make those adjustments to suit those individual learners. So a couple of advantages of doing this. It'll mean that participants progress at their own pace. You'll know that you have people grouped together in a similar stage, but they can be vastly different. Someone might just join for week 1 and someone might be ready to progress and they've been in there 8 or 9 weeks already. And school swimming, for example, or the early stages, you'll get that even more so. So make sure that they do that so that it helps them to develop at their own pace. It ensures that participants are not held back because they're participating at their own rate and they can then move up or wherever they might be. People that have just started that class or maybe have lesser ability have something to aspire to, because people in that class have maybe been there in a while. They could take lead, they might do a little bit more, and they can copy and learn from their peers within that class. It helps with mixed ability classes, which I'm sure a lot of people have in place, especially COVID. There might be a big difference of ability in there. And then it can help those weaker swimmers as well as they're working with other swimmers. So just looking at some of the disadvantages, just got some people moving on screen a little bit, just a brief intermission there. But one of the things we've got as well is disadvantages. It can be difficult to maintain overview of groups. So I know that when I've tried to do some differentiation with different learners, sometimes one's been doing a slightly different thing, and that can be a little bit harder to pull in. So when you're developing your game, can you consider that within? A good example might be in terms of depth. If you're doing something that involves retrieving an object, so that'll be reflected in, say, stage 3 outcomes. Can you have something that's at different depths for different learners because their ability or their water confidence is not the same? So that's quite an easy one to manage compared to something like a kicking drill. If people are using different equipment or they're going at different speeds, that's a little bit harder to manage. You just might have to consider how you'd get around that. And then also, some learners might not like being treated differently. It's important that when you do differentiation, think about what it is that you're doing. So rather than, oh, I'm sorry, you're not quite as good as everyone else, I'm going to have to give you a noodle. Actually, it's saying the person who's progressing a little bit further, they're not having a noodle. So think about how you're wording that, you're supporting your learners, and thinking how that works best for them. So Lauren, could we have the next slide? So this is just an example of some learners swimming on their back. And as you can see here, we've just had to represent, if we could have that a few times, like, can we flip between that? So I'll keep moving, like I'm moving. Very satisfying, that, isn't it? But as you can see on screen, they're all doing the same practice. We're all doing the same activity. And again, they're doing kicking on their back. That's what we're trying to replicate on the screen. But they're all using different equipment. So you can see the learner at the top's just got a purple noodle. The second learner down is using a yellow square float. Actually, he might be correcting something because his knees are coming too high out of the water. And then the learner in the middle has got an aqua pack or a back float or shark fin, whatever it might be, and then arm discs on, and maybe then newer to the class. That's absolutely okay, because they're all still working towards their outcome, but it's tailored to their ability. I know I've certainly done it before. You think, well, everyone's going to have a noodle, or everyone's going to have arm discs, or everyone's going to have a square float. And ultimately, one learner doesn't develop as well because it's not tailored to them. So again, when we go through some of the games, you're going to try and pull out how we could maybe differentiate it based on different learners' abilities. Thank you for that, Laura. We'll save it from going between the two. Moving across the screen now. So a couple of tips around that then that we think are useful to take on board. Variety is the key to make sure the engagement. So different skills, different equipment. That example I just showed you there was different equipment being used, but it could be different practices, different themes, different songs, as we talked about in the chat box. So a couple of different ideas there for you. Establish that positive relationship. So how you're differentiating between those learners, the language you're using, how you're promoting it is really key to get the best out of those learners. Praise them as we're doing that. Even if they're at different levels within the class, it's really important that we're praising them for their progress. And that's one of the fundamental approaches to the Learn Swim program, is that it's regular and often praise and motivation to make sure they stay engaged and move through the program. Not a one-man band, so who else can you use, and what support can you do to help you with this, whether it be an assistant teacher if you've got that advantage there, or whether parents are involved if it's some of the younger ages and they're in the water. Recognise and reward when they progress, and then finally have lots of fun, which is a bit of a theme hopefully that's carrying through today. Okay, Lauren. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at adapting some of our games. And what we've done is we have an activity pack both for preschool and Learn to Swim. And essentially, we also have some ideas for school swimming as well. And ultimately, what these are activities, games adapted around the school swimming program, or the Learn to Swim program, or the preschool program. And it will take you through different activities for each stage, for core aquatic skills, and it'll detail how best to use them. So what we thought would be good to do today is take some of those ones that are already established, you might be familiar with, and break them down in a COVID secure way. So some of the things that we've had to do, and we would encourage you guys to do when you're looking at your lesson plans, if you've started or due to start, is adapting your equipment. So think about how your equipment might need to change. Keep it simple. You know, there's lots of rules that children might be processing on poolside now in terms of coming in a different entry maybe. Maybe they're coming beach ready. There's more for them to process, so try and keep it as simple as possible. Current government guidance is still that there should be no physical contact, so we're staying within 2 meters distance where possible. That's still good government guidance, so we need to think about our adaptations for games that don't require physical contact. Now, that's not included a child that might have a disability. If they need support, then they absolutely should have it. But outside of that, then we need to try and make sure we keep that distance. So what can we do with these games to make sure they're still safe and fun without needing physical contact? Think about the equipment we might need. So do we need to rotate if you've got 2 different classes and you want to change your equipment, and how you might use that for different examples. So one of the things that is in our guidance is around preschool learners being encouraged to bring their own toys and equipment, potentially, rather than sharing and there having to be a cleaning procedure. If an individual parent and child wants to bring their own sinker or a bath toy or a duck, then that's okay, because they can then take that away from them, take that away with them, and you don't have to worry about the cleaning. So a few partners are doing that, which we think is a good idea. And then finally, as Lauren's touched a little bit already, think about that space and organisation now. So for Learn to Swim, so outside of that school swimming setting, children will need to keep social distance still within the water. So think about how games might work given that fact. Now we know if they're moving, we know that they're in a chlorinated environment, it reduces the risk, but still we want to make sure that our games, where possible, are having lots of space between the learners. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Lauren, who's going to take you through some of our examples that we've come up with from stages 1 through 7.
Oh, thanks, Alex. So again, we didn't want to just throw games at you today. We wanted to pick an example per stage, and we wanted to show that actually you can still use the games you were using pre-COVID, but just actually look at how they can be adapted. So we've literally just pulled some examples from our games pack, but I want you to drop in the chat box, one, whether you've seen or played this game before. So this one is How Does Your Garden Grow? And it's suitable, we've popped it in here on stage 1, but you can see the stages at the top of the activity pack sheet. It can actually be played with stage 1 and 2. So how could you, or how would you want to adapt this game so that it's more suitable for a COVID environment? We've got our own suggestions, but we presented this probably about a month ago, and it was really good when we got that interaction. So this one, if you haven't played it before, effectively one of the learners or the teacher would be the gardener. But obviously there may not be a gardener in this occasion with COVID and getting close to each swimmer. But how could you take the principle of this game and still get the children to curl up and float, and then also grow and stretch and become a plant as well? So the actual theme of this game can still exist within COVID, but how would you change this? I would give it a minute and just pop your ideas in the chat box. Yasmin, yes, that's my number one thing. Don't kids love a watering can? Like, they just absolutely love just getting the watering can, and it's just breaking this game down, really, isn't it?
Is that just kids, Lauren, or adults? I mean, I'm quite happy to play that too.
Sorry. Everybody, can play this game.
We've got a few.
But they're a number, then it's not their name, so apologies. But they've actually said change the gardener to a rain cloud. I love that. I literally want to go and deliver that now because that sounds so exciting.
Jason's feedback there, just maintain social distancing in the pool to find their own area. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If space allows, they can have their own space, their own area. You can even set the watering cans out pre-lesson. You've got an assistant, that's a task that you could potentially give them to do. But absolutely, yeah, you can set that all ready for them. I like that one.
I think the biggest thing for us wanting to do this webinar was that, returning to the pool, were we so worried about keeping the children socially distanced that we would end up just delivering lessons that are back and forth. And it's just looking at how we used to deliver games and having that confidence to then make these small adaptations to still have these fun and engaging games for each stage. I really like Sylvia said, but it's just to me, so nobody else can see this one, but children come under the water, hang on, it's scrolling. It's not very good, is it? So the children would come under the water and the teacher would have the watering can from being stood on the side. So they almost like going to a ball, I think you're saying, Sylvia, and then they'd swim closer, almost like in a circuit, maybe. And then once they go under the watering can, they then stretch up and grow. You could even get them to do it so that they curl up in a ball next to the teacher when it's their turn. And as they get the watering can over them, they then go into like a star flow, for example. Really like that. And then they swim on, and you keep it in that circuit kind of organizational method. I really like these. These are so good. Jenny, children have parents in the water with them in these lower stages, so they could either splash the children, or if you had enough watering cans, you could definitely give a parent a watering can. I think that's the beauty of getting parents involved in these lessons, that they can have that close distance with their children, because it's their children. Definitely. I really love these ideas. Thank you so much for contributing. So if you haven't seen our packs before, I've got one here, and you'll see, because we've typed this out rather than doing it on the template, but you can see that on the back of the game, those points are how they appear, So all of these things are detailed. They're just on the flip side of the game details. So actually, all we've done for today's webinar is we've gone in and said, okay, how would we adapt the equipment for a COVID environment? Maybe we don't need watering cans because we don't have enough for one per child. But then another pool might have enough watering cans for one each. Another pool might have parents in the water. So it's all about being flexible and being aware that pools are delivering differently. We've popped teaching tips and points on there as well. They are also on the back of this card in our activity pack. Rules and safety, again, we've suggested random spacing with all facing outwards or potentially away from one another, because we know even if you've put a child in an area, they drift, they move, they're not going to stand still. So it's just doing everything we can to keep them socially distanced. And then we really love the fact that we can make all of these games easier and harder. So as Alex talked us through, that differentiation of actually challenging a child who is overachieving within that stage. I can see the chat box going a little bit. People are coming up with so much more ideas. I love it. It's really good. Okay, we are going to go through a stage 2 version and a stage 3, and then we're going to look at some equipment, and then we're going to put you guys to a task for this as well. So just bear with us for 2 more examples. So stage 2, we are going for nice and well-known rocket ships. And again, at the top of this activity card, you can see that this is suitable from stage 1 to stage 4, and you would just make those adaptations. So again, in the chat box, how would you ensure that this is COVID secure? How would you change this game? How would you challenge your swimmers with this game? How would you simplify it? That's what we want to know. So we've put quite a common or well-known game. So fire away with this one. Okay, so Sue's going straight in there with actually saying older swimmers can have almost an obstacle, whether that's seaweeds or different routes to go through. And she suggested that she'd use a cannon as her organizational method. And I think that's great. I think that's spot on, Sue. There's lots coming through now. Jenny said, have cones that they stand by to encourage separate spaces. Absolutely. You can.
Yeah, just on that one, we saw on the last one, someone mentioned that they purchased some stickers that went on the floor of the pool to do that exact same thing, but they were within the water, that were water friendly, pool friendly, and that could deliver from that. So learners could actually stand on a space in the water, which is quite a nice idea.
There's so many. So if you do use coloured hats and they have a variety, Helen said maybe you just use that as an organisational method for this one. Yasmin said pop a hoop in the water so that they can swim through that. Yeah, so actually giving them a target, you're challenging that swimmer, aren't you, to be more accurate with the direction of travel. So that's going to be really suitable for your advanced stage 3s and your stage 4s, I'd say. Good luck with your 1s and 2s. I'd be impressed.
Yeah,
just stay in the right line of travel, that is.
Yeah, because swimmers always swim in a straight line, don't they?
Always.
And that's important to know, just as people are still typing. If you see on screen, you've got the actual game set out on the top. The stars relate to what stages we think this game is most appropriate. But as you guys are proving, it can be adapted for a lot of other stages. We just think it easily fits for the 4 stages that we mentioned. So you can see that stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 are coloured. So that's how these cards work. But they could absolutely be adapted for lots of other stuff as well.
Yeah, and effectively it relates back to, we all know it relates to streamlining. We all know it relates to our push and glides. And our swimmers in 5, 6, and 7 are still doing this. It just might not be labelled as rocket ships. So yeah, it's just taking that. And yes, Yasmin, I don't think any of us in the London swim team swim in a straight line. Can definitely vouch for myself and Alex.
Like any open water swimming I've ever done, I do twice as much as I need to because I'm going in circles.
Jenny's actually said you could have the seaweed sinkers to keep them separated, so almost give them like a goal or a marker. I really like that, Jenny. Sylvia's actually said as well, oh, they're really lucky that teaching pool has some coloured tiles, so they make really good markers. And I love all of these. I'm sorry, I do. James said if you actually use several hoops and then actually challenge the swimmers on how many hoops they're getting through. Obviously, bear in mind we've got to just risk assess that duration that they're swimming underwater. But yeah, I think definitely for your more advanced swimmers, that's great. And what if we didn't have hoops? We could potentially actually use noodles. We can create them on floats above the water, or if you have a pool that has like a handrail around the edge. I've actually seen some swimmers, some teachers like stuff the pool noodle down the side, so actually nobody's touching the noodle, and it's almost minimal equipment then. So somebody said my site has very low equipment. How would you do it without? So again, I think it's using that imagination. So can they count to a certain number, or can you start to maybe for the higher stages of this one, can you add a rotation in and see how long they can hold that flow as they then rotate onto their back, for example? I'm completely with you on low equipment, and it's really just still taking it and then maybe using different themes. So whether it's colors, whether it's characters, even if the children are different characters, so or different animals, and how do they think they, instead of rocket ships, they're under the water characters, for example, but how would those characters move through the water? How would that be different? So I think that side of teaching is really good when you just tap into their imagination a little bit more. Julie has just said her ducklings love doing push and glides through a hoop, starting on top and then going deeper. When we could help, we used to do submarines where we push them to an assistant. They love it. Oh, how lovely, Julie. It's tough, and we're well aware that people have had to adapt the way they're teaching. But what we really want to reinforce is that games can happen. Fun activities do exist. Oh, Sally, that is a really good suggestion. So she said firework rockets with a star float at the end, and the firework at the end of the firework, and do a bang at the end. I like that. So that's a really good example for no equipment, but actually using that imagination and getting the children really engaged with, you know, we've taken this game as rocket ships and we've become fireworks. That's brilliant. So again, we just wanted to pop together. Actually, we've put here that there's no equipment needed. We've just added in hoops and noodles. They can do this individually to adhere to social distancing, and a lot of you suggested cannons or actually using waves. I think those two are probably the best organisational methods. We've got teaching tips and points there, your rules, safety, and your easier and your harder options as well. Okay, one more, and then we're going to run through equipment and hand over to you guys. So again, we've picked a really exciting activity. Again, typically the lower stages. So we've looked specifically at stage 3 for this one, but actually you can see at the top of the screen, this is applicable to stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. We can adapt it. So I think this one's quite common, but again, in the chat box, just pop whether you've used this or not. And I'm actually going to challenge you all, because there are 72 of you on today's webinar. If you have used the Skydivers game, I want you to type the number 1. If you haven't, I want you to type the number 2. And I want all of you to respond, because that's just a number.
Thing is, Lauren, you've got to read every single one out now. That's
I like this. There's so many of you on the call, on the webinar. I want to get as many of you as involved as possible. Fab. So actually, it's quite a mix. Some of you haven't used the Skydivers game before. Jenny's gone straight in with a suggestion. Love it, Jenny. I would hold a noodle between each child so a child only holds a float rather than hands. That is spot on. Absolutely. They could also be individual skydivers. So start adding in your thoughts on this one, how you would make this COVID secure. My one would definitely be that we are individual skydivers, and we're all going to find a space, random spacing, and we're going to be in our plane, and then we're going to individually skydive. Yes, Jackie, we are on the same wavelength. I like it. And you can really build it up as well for that higher stage, because actually, instead of just going into that star float as a skydiver, you can say, well, how would it feel when you first tumble out of a plane? Well, you need to do a mushroom float or a tuck float. You need to start there and then go into a skydiver. So actually with your older stages, you could probably do this with your younger stages, I believe, but you can build that story into this one as well. And at this point, we've not mentioned any equipment. Oh, Colette, I really like that. So actually do a countdown. So all skydivers go at the same time. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion as well. Actually knowing your group. Somebody's popped in here that they've always preferred individual skydivers rather than having that risk of children not being the correct ability and then potentially pulling another child down as they do it. So I always think this works really well if it wasn't COVID, but if they were in arm discs or a noodle, because they're not relying on the other child to hold them up. So I can see what you're saying there with your suggestion. But if they are pulling another child down, again, if it wasn't COVID, then you would want them to have a flotation aid on them. Have them jump from the side first and then float into different shapes. So Jenny, you're creating a bit more of a story there. You're actually getting them to do that jump in entry, maybe swim to a marked spot, and then they go into there. I like that. Nia said, shout out different numbers as a teacher, and each number has a different shape. And yeah, you could get really involved with that idea, Nia. You could have laminated cards and use those as signals, and that means different skydiving shapes.
One of the top things that we love with laminates in the team is that if you laminate something, it'll stick to the pool floor or pool edge. So actually, what if you laminated a shape and put that on the bottom, and then they land on top of the shape and they have to copy it, you know, something like that if they're wearing goggles. So yeah, you're right. You could really expand that one.
There are some fab ideas. So thank you so much to those of you that have commented. So again, with this one, our main focus was actually no equipment is needed, but this is still fun and engaging. We're getting the children to use that imagination and using that storytelling element as well. We've got teaching tips and points and our rules and safety. So ensure you use this as an individual activity unless, I can't remember who it was in the chat box, apologies, but actually using noodles between them. As long as you can set that up and as long as you can organise that, that's a really good way of ensuring those swimmers are socially distanced. And then you've got that easier and harder option as well. So, Alex, can I hand back over to you for a little bit of equipment chat before we pop these guys into some breakout rooms?
Yeah, absolutely. And we thought equipment, we couldn't not mention equipment. I think at the minute it's very topical with COVID and how the adjustments you might having to make with that. But also some games are dependent on equipment. That's a fantastic way to make things interesting. Although you don't need any, as we've just discussed with those first three examples. But again, in the chat box, trying to be really interactive today. What's some of your favourite pieces of equipment at the minute? So we're not thinking necessarily of flotation equipment that you're using for safety elements, but what equipment are you using that's your go-to thing to make things fun? What do you love using?
And again, I'm going to challenge. I was going to say I'm going to challenge you all because there's 70 of you in there. So.
So we've got some.
I'm watching. Sorry, Alex. You always do that.
You're counting all 70.
Yeah, I am.
Ducks, balls, they're coming up like egg flips. Yeah, I like an egg flip. Watering cans. Noodles is coming a lot. Fantastically versatile piece of equipment. You can do lots from a noodle, especially if you've got some connectors.
Yeah, Gwyneth just said actually connectors.
Boards, so I presume that's like kickboards or swimming. You get bigger, smaller, lots of different stuff. Buckets, animal floats. Yeah, we used to have lots of animal floats. The program I used to look after, there was always Eton. I think they survived a week before a hedgehog was missing a spike or a frog was missing a leg, but that's okay.
So Yasmin has just asked, what are the connectors? So Yasmin, you can effectively get a noodle connector to make, let's say you've got 3 noodles, you could connect the noodles together to create a giant circle. So actually for the skydiving activity, you could connect 2 noodles together between two swimmers to create that distance. And it's just like a hollow piece of noodle material, and each noodle just slots into the end. They're quite popular. Somebody said, oh, Alex has just dropped a link in the chat box to show you what those connectors are.
Yeah, to be clear, we don't endorse that website. I just found it quickly so you can see what they are. We're not promoting them. But they're just an example. They're really good for getting creative. I saw one of teachers that used to work with, he used to make a pirate ship out of it. So he'd get a big float on the bottom and then connectors on the top. That was amazing. He used to do a full lesson around pirates, all just with connectors and floats, so stuff that everybody would have.
It's really interesting to see how many of you are still using equipment, and it's really just understanding that you can deliver fun, engaging activities and games without equipment, but just you can still be using equipment. I think there's a real kind of two sides to delivering in this COVID environment now, and just really reassuring actually. I'm not sure about you, Alex, but it's nice to see all these equipment ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so important within swimming as well. And I do want to know a little bit more about Joy. Joy said bath tread mats. I'd love to know what you're doing with those, Joy.
Oh, yeah.
If you can add a little bit more context, that would be brilliant. Flamingos and unicorn floating toys. Yeah, absolutely. If anyone's at Swim England's last face-to-face conference last year, we had a giant unicorn. I think it was about 6 foot. Is that about 6 foot? Is that right, Lauren? It was a massive thing.
I'm pretty sure it was 6 foot, yeah.
We're not suggesting you have one of those in a class of 6, but
Colette's actually said that because they keep all the kit in individual teaching mesh bags for each stage, they just get dumped in the pool. So actually using equipment has not been an issue, I guess, Colette. It's just been the fact that you're thoroughly cleaning it. I think that's really positive, and I think the main message from today is that whether you choose to use all your usual equipment or minimal equipment, depending on your setup, who you're working for, how much of an option you have, it can still be fun, it can still be engaging, and it can still be exciting for your swimmers.
So just add a little bit of context there. So Joy was saying that they use them to stick on the pool floor with animal shapes and things on, and then you dive down to either put or collect the appropriate animal to the image on the mat. I mean, that's a great idea.
Wow, that's fab. Love that. I mean, I challenged you all, as there's over 70 of you on the call, and I think you all went to town on it. So, yeah, should we move on to the next slide? Because we'll be sat here all day reading those.
I like that one just to end with. Water polo ball for pumpkins, seeing it's Halloween. I like that.
Oh, fab. Yeah, I definitely like that. I'm a fan.
So we've got some really generic ones. I think most pools will have a variety of these. I'm sure you've all got something to this effect on your pool side. I doubt your noodles are that straight and unbitten. And I'm sure some of your sinkers are bitten and pulled apart and all sorts as well. But you all have a variety of equipment. It can be used in many ways. And often a lot of the games that we've talked about today will use equipment in different ways. And yes, they can be used in a very traditional, straightforward way, but they can some really interesting ways they can be used either for a game or that differentiation we talked about as well. So Lauren, if we could have the next slide, please. But there are also some more non-traditional things that we've seen good practice of. We talked a little bit at the annual conference last year, so if anyone was there, you might have come across some of these. But we love different equipment as well that can make things really interesting. So most of the things you see on screen are at minimal cost, and we've picked up at pound shops or whatever it might be, local supermarkets. But things like your ducks and different play equipment that can be used for a period of lessons to make a theme or a game, or someone mentioned that they give a specific color or specific equipment to learners in the class. I think that's a really good idea. But also things such as bubbles. I've seen teachers use bubbles. I mean, do check with your pool manager or whoever's looking after the pool plant that they're happy with that. But using sensory things such as bubbles or music on poolside to complement a game or activity can work really well. You can see in the middle of the screen there, we've got one of the hand mats. My children absolutely love these things. But actually, to get learners comfortable with putting water on their face, if you associate with them in their bath or they're cleaning or washing their face, whatever it might be, then that's a really fun way for them to get them on. And mum and dad could wear them. Pre-COVID, teacher could have one on their hand as well. But a really fun way to get them involved. We see the kind of Harry Potter kind of laminates in the corner as well. Really, that was just to celebrate laminates. Really powerful tool that's easy to use. That can do a variety of things with. So we've got lots of ideas that you can do around games with laminates or themes. I once saw or heard from a teacher that they did a lesson around traveling around the world, and the whole lesson was for stage 1 and 2, and learners had to travel to their aeroplanes, and all the teacher did was set 4 or 5 laminates around the pool edge. One was the Eiffel Tower, and one was London Eye, one was a pyramid, and the whole lesson said, right, we're going to go on a journey today, and we're going to fly to different countries, and then we're going to practice some floats when we get there. And all this teacher did was 4 or 5 laminates and got the children to travel. So that's a big main aim in stage 1 and 2 around the pool. And then they had to copy the image. So if it was the Eiffel Tower, they had to do a pencil float as an example. I think for the London Eye, it was a mushroom float. And that was the whole lesson, but it was just 4 or 5 laminates. And these kids are all of a sudden transported into being planes and going around the pool. So I think really powerful tool to use that. But you could use it for themes, flashcards, all sorts of stuff. And like we said, one thing that I didn't know until recently is that they stick really well to pool tiles as well. So you can keep them in one place, which is useful to know. And then you get more extravagant things like mats and pool connectors that, yes, they've got a little bit of cost associated with them, but you can get some really fun ideas in terms of pirates or themes or different things that you can do to make that lesson really sensory. Lauren, could we have the next slide?
I was just going to pause there because the chat box has been going wild, which we love. Gwyneth has actually asked how the Harry Potter things would work with copyright. Gwyneth, I think if you just download the pictures and laminate any characters yourself, I don't think anybody's going to come along to your swimming pool and pick you up on copyright. As far as we are aware, because we're not selling these, or they're not for profit, I don't think that will be a problem. Alex, would you agree with me on that one?
Yeah, I think if you are concerned, I think maybe just do the colours, and then you can verbally just say, if you're really worried, you could just tweak it a little bit. We've used them lots of times and things to different effect, but if you are concerned, you could just make something up very similar, or something that you are comfortable with.
I think that can be with many children's activities and characters as well, can't it? It's whether we pick Peppa Pig, which the kids absolutely adore, or Spider-Man, or their heroes, anything that you may laminate. I don't think, because it's not being sold on or anything like that at all.
Yeah, I think on the last webinar we had someone who did a lesson theme around Paw Patrol. Not one I'm really familiar with because my kids aren't quite into that one, but yeah, it's a nice idea. Just if you are concerned, you can just anonymize stuff. But yeah.
No, I think it's a great point. I wanted to address it just in case anybody else had the same thought. Okay.
So the other side to equipment that we found is things that could maybe be repurposed that are non-traditional for equipment. So there's 2 examples that myself and Katie adapted for swimming lessons. And it's just, you might have things, children, grandchildren, however it might be, that you could utilize. So the first one you can see are some, my little ones have these little flashcards, as they were, for matching animals. And one of the things we suggested is laminate them, and then that could be a really good syncing game in terms of getting learners to match animals together. So, in terms of social distancing, you can see there's a head and then the rear end of a donkey or a horse. So you could have them selecting both there, so they've got their own piece of equipment to use, but they could also then, you're linking in other things. So for school swimming, where we're thinking of cross-curricular activities and things that link more than just swimming, actually they're starting to do matching, and that could work for numbers. There's a really good example in the School Swimming and Water Safety Charter that's a word search. So different letters on the floor laminated that the learners could then dive under and spell a word out. So it could be swim, or it could be fun, or something really basic for them. But then they're traveling around the pool searching for it. They're using different language skills. You're really starting to link something while it's still getting that core swimming ability. So that was one example of something that you could repurpose, and that was something that was just lying around in one of my children's bedrooms that we could reuse. And then the other 2 pictures is Katie. So our manager who's in our team, the head of Learn to Swim, she's an activity where she uses old, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, they're like tablecloths and bags that have been spare, and they're plastic and suitable for the pool. And what Katie does is,
I think it's disposable tablecloths. I think you're right. Obviously, they can be reused, but they're that kind of texture. Sorry, just to jump in there.
Yeah, and what Katie does is different colours. She gets them together and she essentially shreds them in longer strips and then ties them together. So it's all suitable for in the water. And red and yellow ones can then be made to use seaweed or a flame, and she can use green ones. And actually, it then just becomes something for learners to swim around. So they could use it like a slalom. It could be something that they retrieve. It could be something to theme a lesson. But it's just something very basic that was repurposed and used in a variety of different ways to make the lesson a little bit more interesting and a little bit more fun. So what we'd love to do, again in the chat box, is hear if you've done anything like that. So on the last webinar, we had someone got like a 2-litre bottle of water. They took all the plastic off, and then inside they put some different items. So they put a bit of water or a bit of sand, and then they also got some cling film and tied it in a ball and put a little bit of a rubber band around it, so it looked like a bit like a jellyfish. And they would use that as a sinker, because once it was full of water, it'd sink. But then it was sensory because it was different colours and different lights. And as long as it was sealed, it then didn't go in the water. So they just used a piece of plastic then that they could, or a plastic bottle, sorry. And they then used it as a really interesting sinker that had stuff inside it for the learners to interact with. So if you guys have got any kind of examples like that, it'd be great to hear them in the chat box. Yeah, so if you're willing, drop any ideas that you've had or you've come across in the chat box. That'd be great to hear.
Julie did message saying she's used the same sort of thing, Alex, and they also used crowns for the royal wedding. I love that. I think that's brilliant. Julie, I'm assuming that it's did you make them? Or what I thought of, you can get the blow-up crowns. If you use them, I am amazed.
That's really good.
Fab. I think that's so awesome, isn't it? And the kids just get that different kind of feel for their lesson for that week or two. Rachel's put in some really good ideas as well. So she's actually used large frame jigsaws. That's brilliant, isn't it? That's such a nice idea. Flashing balls, decorate a floating hoop to make it kind of Halloween spiders, or Christmas elf on the shelf. Silver tape for raindrops. Oh, Rachel said inflatable Connect 4. Oh, I like that. Use A to Z play mats to match up items. Wow.
So many kind of really inexpensive things you can do. A teacher, again, on the last chat box that we had when we did this about a month ago, they said they take colanders in. So rather than just buckets and cups, they use colanders because the water falls out in different ways. Spatulas, and let the learners, like especially for stage 1 and 2, let them try and scoot water up, and egg and spoon races because they're doing travel and they're concentrating. So a couple of interesting ideas there as well.
Yeah, Sharice just mentioned, and you know, when we do these webinars, we're well aware that a lot of our delivery is potentially comes across as blanket, because we know that there are so many pools across England that we don't know whether people will be allowed to use their own equipment from home. We don't know whether they'll have access to much equipment. We don't know what their pool setup is. We don't know what your resources are like. So we completely understand that your company may not allow you to bring in other equipment other than what they specify and that's applicable to their risk assessments. So we are well aware of that. So everything is to encourage you and to give you ideas, and then to make it suit your own individual pools. Colette said we have foam building blocks and we get the children to rebuild the house from one side of the pool or town to another town on the other side of the pool. I love that
one. Yeah, I've heard that one before. I think that's brilliant. I really like that one.
They're the transporter and they travel on their backs to the other side. Oh my God, I actually love that, Colette. That's amazing. And it's so much storytelling. Like, children love that element, don't they? They feel like they're really invested in a story. Oh, Helen's gone in with for school swimming, it's good to collect coloured items and put them into coloured zones. So yeah, you've got that cross-curricular there. That's brilliant, Helen. We like that one. Rachel said orange and green balls for Halloween, and then red ones for Rudolph's nose around Christmas. Some really good suggestions. Okay, because again, we could sit here all day chatting about all these ideas, and I'm very wary of the time. So we're going to try something a little bit different. We've put together an activity again for stage 4, 5, 6, and 7. But what we wanted to do, which we don't normally get the opportunity to do on webinars, is actually pop you all into a breakout room. So if you've not done a breakout room before, it will basically push you into a smaller webinar group where you can come off mute, you can pop your videos on so everybody can see each other, and we want you to pick a game that you might use traditionally before COVID that you would now still feel comfortable delivering whilst we're in this COVID environment. So you can pick what stage it is and what game it is. We're going to give you the freedom. And should we set them 10 minutes, Alex? Do you think that's okay looking at timing? Okay, fab. So let's pop you in a breakout room. And when you come back, all we want you to do is designate one person from your group to just pop your idea in the chat box, because we won't have time to run through everybody's. We just want you to write your game idea down and pop it in the chat box. So just when you get the time warning, make sure that one person knows who they are and that they will pop it in the chat box when they return. Okay, so Stuart said they discussed the crocodile game as it is still socially distanced but fun. And they can be any animal they choose. It doesn't have to be that crocodile focus. And also you discussed a tag game, but with noodles, as this means to tag to keep a distance. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd be wary of with noodles from a teacher's point of view, and Stuart, you'll probably nod your head and agree, is that potential of it getting a little bit too exciting and those noodles becoming a bit of a whack-a-mole game. Whereas we're thinking of that tag game kind of, maybe there's a rule that the noodle has to stay flat on top of the water or something. But yeah, I really like that. Thank you, Stuart, and your group. Kate said use large hoops and sink 3 or 4 in a line underwater. The children go on a journey to the underwater world. I love that. They'd obviously go one at a time. They then tell you what creatures they have seen on their journey. Now, Kate, our manager, actually delivers lessons on a Sunday, and she's used some characters, laminated them, and then just tied them to the hoops. So actually, you could create your own kind of underwater world, and then the children pick 2 or 3 characters that they saw on their way. So yeah, I really like that one. Thank you, Kate, and the rest of your group. There's so many in this group chat. I will make sure that we share them after today's webinar. Alison said she would use noodles as weeds, and you have to avoid saves the bashing. I hope we're not bashing each other with the noodles, Alison, but I think I know what you mean. So actually just moving through those noodles as if they're weeds, and again, that storytelling element. Okay, so Mandy said about a pirate game, various stages, walk the plank, finding the gold, floating on their back, quiet, so don't wake up the sharks. So lots of different things that are all incorporated in that pirate game. Really love all of these suggestions. Thank you so much. Hopefully there is something for you to take back that is new. Now we are very aware of time, but we've got carried away today. So I'm going to pass over to Alex just to take us through a quick light touch on how these games, activities and practices link to swimmers for stages 8, 9 and 10.
Yeah, just to kind of finish off really before we dig into some more of the support and resources that are there to help you, and then free your time up then, guys, because I'm sure you've got lots of other things on as well. But really, it's just to say that our framework is designed that everything that goes through from stages 1 to 7, and a lot of the aquatic skills that are being introduced, developed, and then mastered, link through to stages 8, 9, and 10 as well. And that's of the 4 competitive frameworks. Seeing competitive pop up there. So one of my questions is going to be, Sue, you put me to it, which one's missing? And you're exactly right, it's competitive swimming. So competitive swimming is the one that you see most often. You see 8, 9, and 10 as a continuation from 7, which is competitive swimming. But you've also got things such as diving, artistic swimming or synchronized swimming, water polo, and obviously open water, which is this year we've seen a really big uptake in, which has been great to see. And how actually our games and activities can lay some of the foundation skills for future activities. So Lauren, if we could have the next slide, please. We've got a couple of examples of what we're getting at here. Now we have a whole specific webinar specifically on this topic, so we've not got time to kind of dive into it. That was a purposeful pun, in full depth now. But actually we wanted to touch on it and see the impact that your games could have on those future individuals as well. So for example, if we think of water polo as we've got on screen now, you might be developing things such as team games or competitive nature within an activity or game, and that's absolutely key for water polo. So how can you build that up and factor that into your team games? In terms of open water, there's some really kind of specific skills for open water. So what games can you include in there? So it might be certainly post-COVID, swimming closer together in the higher stages, going around a buoy, all those kind of things, even things like spotting in particular schools that you might, skills you might develop in the future. But then things like diving as well. So you think in stages 7, you'll see that and then working back 6 and then 5, there is progressively a kneeling dive, a crouching dive, all the way to a standing dive. But actually way before a learner does that, they need to be able to rotate at their hip, they need to be able to submerge underwater, they need to be able to streamline, they need to be able to do a handstand, and all these skills build up to where the point they can dive. So think about how your games and activities are really laying those foundations for future and higher stages as well. Lauren, could we have the next stage, please? The next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is just look at some of those further resources. So I'm going to hand it back over to Lauren, just to kind of round off. We've covered how best to create a game within a COVID environment, some of the things you need to consider from a health and safety point of view, your risk assessments, your communication. We've looked at adapting some existing games, and then hopefully we've pulled some feedback from you guys around the different types of activities you could be delivering. And you guys have come up with some amazing ideas. So I'm going to hand over to Lauren, and now we're just going to look at the next just 5 minutes before we finish, what support is out there already in the way of resources and additional training to support you with this as you head back to the water.
Resources that are available, and apologies if you have attended a lot of webinars with myself and Alex. We do shout about our resources a lot. They are fantastic to encourage your swimmers and support their learning. We particularly like the storybooks for the preschool age and children that are just starting their journey into swimming. So these are available. Everything is available to purchase on the Swim England shop, and these are available to purchase and then resale as well. So we've spoken about our activity packs a lot today. So this is actually our preschool framework activity pack. And I won't read through everything on the screen, but ideally this is for your teachers to have as a reference point. We're not saying that these are how games must be delivered, but through our examples today, we can see that we shouldn't shy away from these games and activities. Now we're in this COVID new world of swimming delivery. The preschool framework activity pack is also really superb at involving the parents and giving them ideas and showing them how they may support their child and do different holds if you are getting parents involved, even up to stage 1. Then the one we've actually used today with 58 games and activities in this pack, you can see how we picked out a handful of these games and we adapted them to the new COVID environment. They are ring-bound and they're excellent for poolside. You know, we know how bad it gets as soon as you take paper onto the poolside. These are brilliant, and some of them have got songs in them, and you can show the children if they forget the words, and you know, if you forget the words, it's a good prompt as well. So one of our biggest resources that we utilise is the expected standards videos. These are fantastic to cover stages 1 to 7 and then 8, 9 and 10 in terms of what do these outcomes look like? What is the standard? How can you benchmark your swimming and ensure that your swimming teachers or your colleagues are all delivering and assessing to the same level? And one of my favourite resources is the Swim England Toolkit. Really good to keep you updated. Again, I would refer to it as your swimming teacher Bible. So it's great to have as a reference point, and again, ensure that you are delivering across the board in your swim school. And that was a whistle-stop tour through our resources, but if you have any further questions, we will be here for the next 5 minutes. We are well aware that we have ran over time by about 6 minutes, but thank you for hanging on in there with us. If you have any questions, do email us at learntoswim@swimming.org, and you can find everything that we mentioned today through our website at swimming.org. But yes, thank you for joining us today. It's been lovely having you all.